Welcome to the Well-Being Podcast, where every episode is a step towards a healthier, happier you. Let's grow, thrive, and shine together. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that I think we can all relate to, that feeling of not being enough, especially when it comes to reaching our goals. You know that voice that whispers things like, "Who are you kidding?" Or, "You'll never be as good as." We've got a stack of your sources here, articles, research, even some personal notes, and we're ready to unpack it all.
And it's fascinating how this feeling of not being enough seems to be something that so many people experience. It doesn't matter your age, your job, where you live, it's a universal struggle.
Okay, so it's not just me. That's actually kind of reassuring in a weird way. But why is this feeling so widespread? What's fueling this not enough epidemic?
Well, one major factor is the culture of comparison we live in. Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with highlight reels of other people's lives on social media, making it easy to feel like we're coming up short. But it's not just social media. There's also a ton of pressure from family, society, even ourselves, to achieve a certain definition of success.
It's true. It's like everyone else is effortlessly reaching their dreams while we're stuck struggling. Like, do you ever scroll through social media and think, wait, is everyone secretly a millionaire influencer except me?
Right. And those high expectations, whether they come from external sources or from within, can set the bar impossibly high. Imagine a student constantly feeling the pressure to get perfect grades, or a young professional comparing their career path to everyone else's. It's a recipe for feeling inadequate.
And then there's the big one, fear of failure. I know I've definitely let that fear hold me back from going after certain goals because I was terrified of messing up.
Fear of failure is huge. It can be so paralyzing that it keeps us from taking risks or even trying in the first place. We get so caught up in the potential pain of failing that we don't even give ourselves the chance to succeed.
It's almost like we're our own worst enemies sometimes. Think about it.
Yeah.
Would you talk to your best friend the way you talk to yourself? Probably not right.
Exactly. We often lack self-compassion. We're incredibly hard on ourselves for even the smallest mistakes, and we forget to acknowledge our strengths and accomplishments. We need to learn to be kinder to ourselves.
Okay, so we've got comparison culture, high expectations, fear of failure, and a lack of self-compassion. That's quite a combination. But are these feelings really that big of a deal? I mean, it's not fun to feel inadequate, but does it really have a tangible impact on our lives?
Unfortunately, yes. These feelings aren't just a minor annoyance. They can have serious consequences for our mental and even physical well-being. The World Health Organization estimates that depression and anxiety disorders cost the global economy $1 trillion each year. Self-doubt plays a significant role in those statistics. It can contribute to procrastination, burnout, difficulty making decisions, and even physical health problems.
Wow, that's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
$1 trillion. So it sounds like these feelings of not being enough are not something we should just brush aside. But what can we actually do about them? Is there any way to overcome this feeling and start feeling more confident and capable?
Absolutely. There are strategies we can use to fight back against self-doubt and start feeling more empowered. The first step is simply acknowledging how you feel. Don't try to bury those feelings or pretend they aren't there. Recognizing that you're struggling is the first step toward healing.
It's like that saying, you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. So step one, acknowledge the feeling. What comes next?
Next, you need to start challenging those negative thoughts. When you catch yourself thinking things like, "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never be able to do that," stop and ask yourself, is that really true? What evidence is there to support that thought? More often than not, those negative thoughts are based on fear and assumptions, not facts.
I actually started doing this thing where I literally say, stop out loud whenever I catch myself spiraling into negative self-talk. It might sound silly, but it really does help break the cycle.
That's a great technique. It's all about consciously interrupting those negative thought patterns and choosing to replace them with more realistic and positive ones.
Okay, so we've acknowledged the feeling and we're challenging negative thoughts. What else can we do to combat this not enough feeling?
Setting realistic goals is key. Often we set the bar so high for ourselves that it's almost impossible to reach. And then when we inevitably fall short, we feel like failures. Instead, break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It feels a lot less overwhelming when you break it down into smaller chunks.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those small wins along the way. Every step forward is a victory worth acknowledging.
So acknowledge the feeling, challenge negative thoughts, set realistic goals. What about social media? We talked earlier about how the culture of comparison online can be a big contributor to feeling inadequate. Should we just delete all of our accounts?
Deleting your accounts might not be necessary, but it is important to be mindful of how social media is impacting you. If you find yourself constantly comparing yourself to others and feeling worse afterward, consider limiting your use or unfollowing accounts that trigger those negative feelings.
Honestly, unfollowing those perfectly curated accounts can be so freeing. It's like giving yourself permission to focus on your own unique journey.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial strategy, practicing self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend.
That's easier said than done, though, right? How do we actually cultivate more self-compassion?
There are several ways to practice self-compassion. Mindful self-compassion meditation is a great technique. It involves bringing awareness to your breath, noticing your thoughts and feelings without judgment, and offering yourself words of kindness and support.
So it's like becoming your own best friend and cheerleader.
Exactly. You deserve your own kindness and support, and sometimes that means being gentle with yourself when you make mistakes and celebrating your accomplishments no matter how small. As we're talking about all of this, it's making me think about how much of this not enough feeling is tied to our own individual definitions of success.
That's so true. What even is success anyway? It seems like everyone has a different answer to that question.
Exactly. And a lot of times that definition of success is shaped by things outside of ourselves, societal pressures, family expectations, even those carefully curated social media feeds we were talking about earlier.
So instead of figuring out what truly matters to us,
Yeah.
we end up chasing someone else's version of success.
It happens all the time. We get so caught up in trying to achieve those external markers of success, the big promotion, the fancy car, the picture-perfect family, that we lose sight of our own personal values and aspirations.
And then when we inevitably don't measure up to those often unrealistic standards, we feel like failures.
It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We set ourselves up for disappointment because we're chasing a definition of success that doesn't align with our authentic selves.
So how do we break free from that cycle? How do we figure out what success really means for us on our own terms?
It all starts with looking inward. You need to take the time to really reflect on what truly matters to you. What are your values? What brings you joy and fulfillment? What kind of impact do you want to make on the world?
It's so easy to get caught up in the daily grind that we forget to pause and ask ourselves those big questions.
It's true. But once you have a clearer understanding of your own values and aspirations, you can start setting goals that actually align with them. Goals that feel meaningful and motivating to you, not just goals that will impress other people.
It's like we're taking back control of our own definition of success.
Exactly. And when you're working toward goals that genuinely matter to you, it becomes a lot easier to stay motivated even when you hit those inevitable roadblocks.
Because those setbacks feel less like failures and more like opportunities for learning and growth.
Precisely. You're no longer defining yourself by those external markers of success, so you're less likely to feel inadequate when things don't go exactly according to plan. You're more resilient.
This is making me think about something you said earlier about how our thoughts really do shape our reality. If we're constantly telling ourselves we're not good enough, it's going to be that much harder to believe in ourselves and our ability to achieve our goals.
It's absolutely true. Our mindset plays a huge role in how we experience the world and how we approach challenges. If you're constantly feeding yourself negative self-talk, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But the good news is we have the power to change those thought patterns. We can choose to focus on our strengths, celebrate our wins, and believe in our potential to grow and learn.
And that's where practices like mindfulness and self-compassion come into play.
We touched on those earlier, but could you go into a little more detail about how those practices can help cultivate a more positive mindset? I think our listeners would really benefit from hearing more about that.
Of course, mindfulness is all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It helps us become more aware of our thoughts, feelings, and sensations without getting swept away by them.
So instead of getting trapped in that spiral of negative self-talk, we can observe those thoughts from a distance and choose not to engage with them.
That's the idea. It's like watching clouds drift by. They come and go, but they don't define the sky.
That's a great analogy. And how does self-compassion fit into this?
Self-compassion is about treating ourselves with the same kindness, understanding, and forgiveness that we would offer to a close friend.
So instead of beating ourselves up for our mistakes, we acknowledge that we're human. We're gonna mess up sometimes, and that's okay.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all imperfect works in progress, and that's perfectly fine. We need to learn to be kinder to ourselves.
These practices sound so simple, yet so powerful. How can we start incorporating them into our everyday lives?
There are lots of ways to cultivate mindfulness and self-compassion. Even just a few minutes of meditation each day can make a big difference. There are also some great guided meditations available online and through apps.
I've heard good things about apps like Headspace and Calm.
Those are great resources. Journaling can also be a really powerful tool for self-reflection and processing emotions. Try writing down your thoughts and feelings without any filtering or judgment, and then respond to yourself with kindness and encouragement as if you were talking to a friend.
It's like becoming your own therapist.
In a way, yes. And never underestimate the power of simply talking to someone you trust. Sharing your struggles with a friend, family member, or therapist can be incredibly cathartic and helpful.
It's a good reminder that we're not alone in this. Everyone faces challenges and struggles with insecurities at some point.
Absolutely. Connecting with others and sharing our experiences can provide a sense of support and belonging, and that can be incredibly healing.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I'm starting to see this whole idea of not being enough in a totally new light.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and don't be afraid to ask for support when you need it.
And above all, remember that you are worthy and you are enough just as you are.
Absolutely. Your worth is inherent. It doesn't depend on external achievements or validation from others.
That's such an important message. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights today. I know our listeners are going to get so much out of this conversation.
It's been my pleasure.
Now, for our listeners who are feeling inspired and want to delve deeper into this topic, what resources would you recommend?
There are so many great books and articles out there. One of my personal favorites is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown.
I've heard amazing things about that book.
It's a beautiful exploration of vulnerability, shame, and the power of wholehearted living.
I'm adding it to my reading list right now. What about podcasts? Are there any podcasts you'd recommend for listeners who want to continue on this journey of self-discovery and personal growth?
Definitely. The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos is fantastic. It explores the science of happiness and well-being in a really accessible and engaging way.
That one's been on my list for a while.
And for those who are interested in mindfulness and meditation, the Mindful Mama podcast is a great resource.
Those are all fantastic recommendations. Thank you so much for sharing. I know our listeners will find them super helpful.
My pleasure.
And before we move on, I just want to remind everyone that if you're struggling with feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt, please don't hesitate to reach out for professional help. Therapists and counselors are trained to provide support and guidance on your journey to healing and self-acceptance.
That's so important. There's no shame in asking for help. In fact, it's a sign of strength and courage.
This has been such a powerful and inspiring conversation. Thank you again for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. You know, one thing that really struck me as we were getting ready for this deep dive was just how many people struggle with this feeling of not being enough.
Right. It's almost like it's just part of being human.
It really is. It makes you wonder why we tend to be so hard on ourselves.
I think part of it is that we're surrounded by messages telling us to strive for more achievement, more success, more everything. It can get pretty exhausting.
It's true. We're constantly bombarded with these ideas about what we should be doing, what we should be achieving. It's easy to get caught up in that and start feeling like we're not measuring up.
Especially when we're comparing ourselves to other people, which, as we've talked about, can be a real recipe for feeling inadequate.
And it's important to remember that those comparisons we make are often based on a very incomplete picture.
Right. We're seeing the highlight reel, not the behind-the-scenes struggles and setbacks that everyone experiences.
Exactly. Everyone has their own unique journey with its own ups and downs.
So how do we shift our focus away from those external comparisons and start appreciating our own individual journeys?
One powerful approach is to cultivate a sense of gratitude.
Gratitude. That sounds a little counterintuitive. How does being thankful help with feeling like we're not enough?
When you focus on what you're grateful for, it shifts your perspective away from what you lack and toward what you already have.
So instead of dwelling on our perceived shortcomings, we're taking the time to acknowledge the good things in our lives.
Precisely. And that can have a truly profound impact on our overall well-being.
It's like we're retraining our brains to look for the positive instead of automatically focusing on the negative.
Exactly. And the more you practice gratitude, the more natural it becomes.
So how can we actually cultivate more gratitude in our day-to-day lives? What are some things we can do?
There are many simple but surprisingly effective practices you can incorporate into your routine. One of my favorites is keeping a gratitude journal.
Oh, I've heard of those. That's where you write down a few things you're grateful for each day.
That's it. It could be anything big or small, from your health and loved ones to a beautiful sunset or a delicious meal.
I love that. It's about noticing those little moments of joy
Mm.
and appreciating them.
Another powerful practice is expressing gratitude to others.
Like simply saying thank you to someone who's done something kind for
Yeah,
you.
exactly. Or even just telling someone you appreciate them.
Those small gestures can really make a difference, both for the person receiving them and for the person expressing the gratitude.
They really can. And they have a ripple effect. When we express gratitude to others, it often inspires them to do the same, creating a more positive and appreciative atmosphere.
So we're not just making ourselves feel better,
Mm-hmm.
we're contributing to a more positive world around us.
Exactly. And that's a pretty amazing thing.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. I feel like we've really explored this topic from all angles.
We have. We've talked about what causes that feeling of not being enough. We've looked at the impact it can have. And most importantly, we've explored some powerful strategies for overcoming it.
And we've learned about some really valuable tools: mindfulness, self-compassion, and gratitude. That can help us cultivate a more positive and resilient sense of self.
Which ultimately is what this whole journey is all about.
Learning to love and accept ourselves just as we are.
Exactly. Recognizing that we are enough just as we are. We don't need to achieve some arbitrary definition of success to be worthy of love and happiness.
That's such a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insights today. I know this conversation is going to resonate with our listeners.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the feeling of not being enough. We hope you found it helpful, insightful, and empowering. Remember, you're not alone in this. And with the right tools and support, you can overcome those feelings of inadequacy and create a life that is truly meaningful and fulfilling. A life that is aligned with your own unique definition of success. Thanks for listening to the Wellbeing Podcast. Take care, stay inspired, and see you next time.